Welcome to Dulles. We're a community of faith that embodies the love of Jesus for the good of our neighbor and renewal of our world. We're so glad you're listening.
I'm going to say on camera to those, quite a few who watch from outside of our area. I know in Florida, I know on the coast of North Carolina. Just got an email from some good friends of Dulles here who watch every week. Out in the desert of California, there's quite a few. So we're just so happy that you are with us every Monday or Monday afternoon or Tuesday, whenever you can watch. We love having you. Okay, so longtime neighbors of ours that lived on our street would travel, and when I say traveled more than anyone I've ever met, I mean dramatically more than anyone. She worked for a hotel company, and part of her job, get this, talk about jobs, part of her job was to travel the world and visit properties, have meetings at those properties, but inspect their properties. And so they would tell us, hey, we're headed out Monday to Beijing, or we're going back to New Zealand. I mean, it was just all the time. And one year, Amy got their mail for them. Amy figured out and was joking with them that she had gotten their mail more that year than they had. And so when I say travel a lot, so I asked him one day in the yard, hey, you've been everywhere. Like, I think everywhere. If you could only go one place ever again, of all the places you've been, what would be that place? And he didn't hesitate. He said, oh, that's my dentist chair location. He said, whenever I'm having dental work, I tell myself, this is how he said it, I tell myself, I'm sitting in this particular spot we've been to so many times on the coast of Maui. And he said, it's just hard to describe. The water, the beach, the view from this spot. It's actually on a porch. And the two of them have been on this porch many, many times just looking out. The palm trees, the ocean breeze. And, you know, I'm starting to tell myself that's where I want to be right now. The sunset. And he went on to say that whenever he needs to be somewhere else, that's where he tells himself that he is. So how about you? And if you don't mind, just maybe a few of you, what's that place? Where do you tell yourself you are when you suddenly realize you need to be someplace else? Anybody? Montana. Yeah. I've had some retreats there, and one of my favorite places. You guys need to travel more. Oh, Amy's going to say Disney World. Okay. She's one of them. That means I guess I am too. Anybody else? Anywhere fishing? Okay. Hurghada, Egypt, on the Red Sea. Yeah, you've told me about that place. There's a sinister, self-defeating version of this experience we're talking about. And we all do it. My guess is you've done it this week. And it's a mental picture, not of a location, but a mental picture that you have of you, that you have of yourself. And this has everything to do with the kind of story that we're living, or the kind of story we end up living. And it has to do with the story that you're telling yourself. Now, let's just review quickly. We're in this series. We're talking about what makes a great story, what sucks us into that book or into that series, what keeps us up too late and we go to work yawning because we decided to watch episodes 7 and 8 when we were only going to watch one. What makes a great story, first of all, is, of course, a character who has a desire, this object of desire. But in any great story, pretty quickly in the telling of the story, there has to be the introduction of conflict. And this is so ironic. Those of us who are trying to escape and we want life to be happier, we're only drawn into stories that have conflict, really well-developed conflict. And this has to do with the way we vicariously relate to characters. We know they're facing something like what I face. This is a relationship crisis. This is a financial upending. I know what this feels like. What's going to happen? What are they going? And what we're really looking for in the story is, how are they going to choose? What decisions are they going to make because of the obstacles, because of the crisis, because of the challenge? See, that's what hooks us into a story. We learn in a well-told story, this is interesting, the way someone chooses as a response of the conflict they face, we learn about that character's true character. We learn what they're really made of. We find out a lot about a person, particularly when they're under stress, in the choices they make. It's interesting that Jesus is the only world religion presented to us in the form of a story. Every other major world religion is just lists of decrees and edicts. Jesus comes to us in this form of story and steps into our conflict and becomes, if you really understand the nature of the cross, the crucifixion of Jesus, he becomes our conflict. He takes our conflict onto himself. Now, a retreat that our church, a lot of you know our church is a part of a network all around the country. There's about 100 of us churches, and we have a lead pastors retreat every year. And psychologist, counselor Dr. Steve Cuss, joined us 2 years ago, and he was just fantastic. Such a humble guy. He's brilliant. His profession is helping people find their true identity following crisis, trauma, their true identity in the character of Jesus. And he tells the story, it was remarkable to hear, that he believed, having been in church his whole adult life, committed in his faith, helping people understand the relevance of Jesus and his character, he believed that Jesus was his deepest belief. He just assumed it. He kind of carried himself this way. It was this underlying kind of soundtrack playing constantly that his deepest belief was Jesus. And he had this kind of eye-opening moment one day when he realized, wow, this actually isn't true. Jesus is my most precious belief, but I actually have deeper beliefs. And he went on to say that while practicing, and really being revered, he's written a number of books, and he's been just respected by many, in his practice, in his publicly stated faith, he uncovered one of many, many, many traits in his life, deeper beliefs in his life, that he felt that he had to make everyone in his life happy. He could never disappoint anyone. And this was starting to play out. He was acting out. It was starting to play out in his life where he became a people pleaser. His job, his purpose at work, his purpose in his family, his purpose in his faith was to just please everyone. And this started him in kind of this spiral. And the realization he had one day was that, wow, my deeper belief, Jesus is a precious belief in my life. My deeper belief is that I'm on this earth to make everyone happy, and I can never let anyone down ever. And I loved his honesty. For a room of lead pastors, who are tempted, in any kind of leadership job, your temptation is always to present like, hey, I figured this out, follow me. Here at Dulles, what our leaders and I are trying to practice as best as we can is, we figured out that Jesus is our leader, so follow me as we follow Jesus, our leader. So I'm calling this message today the story I'm telling myself. Because I think we all do this. I know I've done it. I know that this is something that can become habitual, and if you're not even consciously aware of it, it can lead your life. The story you tell yourself can define and dictate the story you live. I want to give some examples. People will always let me down. Now, that's not a story that I tell myself, but I'll get to at least one of mine. I hear often a version of this at coffee, talking with friends, sometimes somebody who's new to church or new to faith. It turns out the most prominent struggle of their life is this repetitious, every day, what guides them, what dictates their lives is the people around them, the people in their world will always let them down. And it just leads to a life of distrust. It leads to loneliness. Everyone is out for themselves. You know, if this is the soundtrack running, if this is the script that you're telling yourself, this actually leads to being a very not generous person. You hold back. When you think everyone's ultimately doing what's in their own best interest, it actually prevents you from taking care of other people, expressing the love of God of others, for others. If someone disagrees with me, they are against me. This is viewing other opinions as a threat rather than as an opportunity to learn. Other opinions, this is why healthy conflict is really good, not just for companies and for teams. If you work on a team where conflict isn't allowed, you're in trouble. That team is not going to succeed. Other opinions are great opportunities for us to grow. But you're not going to live that way if this is the story you're telling yourself. They don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe it's safe to say that for every one of us here, this has been some kind of narrative or story we've told ourselves at some point in life. Now, maybe the story you tell yourself is less about the people immediately around you in your life, and maybe it's more about just the way you look at the world. Things will never get better. Where your trust is in just broken circumstances. You really don't have an optimism because there isn't a voice of hope in your life, like real hope. I'm too broken to be used by God. The world is too messed up for hope. These kinds of voices, these kinds of stories that we tell ourselves are often rooted in how we view ourselves. We tell ourselves these things because of how we view ourselves. When I was in my early 20s, I felt this just growing desire. It sounds super nerdy, and I know it's so hard to relate to this, but I had this growing desire to lead a church, to become a pastor. And I started telling my friends, and I remember one night, every friend around me laughed out loud. You know, we were talking about our dreams, what we're going to do, architecture, consulting, and they get to me, and I'm like, I think God maybe wants me to lead a church. They laughed and laughed and laughed, and then they kind of settled. It was one of those things. They settled down. They kind of like, oh, they feel bad for Brad, and then they start laughing again. And I had this loud, pervasive thought that constantly said pastors are boring. They live kind of irrelevant lives outside of this, this portion of time on a Sunday morning where they're in front of everybody. The perception, at least, the story I told myself was the perception was that people had to sit in this lecture, this sort of God lecture that the pastor gives. And maybe this is true, actually. Maybe the story I was telling myself is actually the way, maybe it's true for a lot of pastors, I don't know. But I had this limited view of what God wanted to do through pastors, and it limited what I was allowing him to do. I felt this calling of God in my life. This is what's so messed up about how we work. We sense God calling us, but then this story takes over and becomes louder than the voice of God. I couldn't see the pastor he wanted me to be. I'm not talking about trying to be cool. I'm just talking about being a friend. and hitting the basketball court with a friend or a buddy, or just going to coffee and, dissecting movies or that kind of thing. Just everyday life. Jesus told so many stories through parables. Today, our modern version of this is movies, TV series, and we don't kind of see it that way, but he was constantly annoying the religious leaders because he was just relating to people through these parables, these everyday pictures. And I had this mental block. The story I was telling myself is, if I obey God and I step into this, I'm going to become irrelevant. I'm going to obey him and become irrelevant. And God had to work all of this stuff out of me, and I had to figure out where this was coming from. It's so common today for many to say things, just they would never say it out loud. I'm not enough. I'll never change. Everything always goes wrong for me. You ever been one of those Debbie Downers? It's really the story you're telling yourself. It's rooted in some kind of narrative, maybe because you heard it. Maybe someone communicated that to you. I matter when I achieve, when I succeed, believing that success or productivity or approval is what really defines you. I'm not easy to love. This is a pervasive story that humans have become really good at telling themselves. Because of something in the past, because of something that you've done, something that's been done to you. Here's one. I actually put it on the screen. I don't know if I needed to put this on the screen, babe, but I had, it's still there. If I'm honest, this is still lingering. It's like a default that God is trying to completely rid me of. But early in our marriage, I often had this story, and I didn't even understand it. I didn't even know it for years. If Amy and I don't agree, something is wrong and it needs to be fixed. And it led us into so many arguments, just so many, and we would ask each other, I don't know how many, hundreds, literally hundreds of times we've said, what started this argument? And she would say, I can't remember. I don't remember either. And then we end up laughing a lot because of that. This is so ridiculous. I'm exhausted. I feel like I just worked out, and we've argued. Why are we arguing? And I had to realize over the years, some of the source of that is, we don't agree on something, and so we've got to fix that right now. That's a terrible way to live, trying to fix somebody. And if you feel like you need to fix somebody, you are the one that needs to be fixed, right? That's how God turns that around and teaches us what's really going on. Is it possible that you put more of your faith, more of your real trust in the story you tell yourself than in God's story, than in God's words about the world around you, about the people in your life, about you, his words about you? Do you put more faith in the story you tell yourself than in the story God wants for you? It's amazing. No one would say, yeah, I want to do that. No, that's my intent. Of course not. And I think it's the reality of so many of us. This really gets to, I think, the core, the crux of what's broken. Why? Who would write a script? We talk about writing the script of our lives. No one gets the story that they wanted. No one gets this perfect script. We've talked about that in this series, that I'm going to graduate, I'm going to get into this great college, and then I'm going to graduate with this amazing job, and then, we talk with the cliches about the white picket fence and that family. We're just going to be happy all the time. No one gets the script. No one gets the story they wanted. And I think some of the reality of what's happening here in this story, we don't get the story we wanted, and yet we have this pervasive story that's running in our heads that's broken and flawed, and it leads us to more brokenness. And I think the crux or the root of it is related to this inner critic. Because inevitably, if you are constantly looking at the people around you, they can never be trusted. People are always out for themselves. What's really happening is your inner critic has taken over the narrative of your life. You're no longer hearing, or maybe you never have paid attention to, God's words about you, his future for you, what he thinks of broken humans, how he responds to those who are ugly. See, when you surrender yourself to the voice, the words, the script that is God's story, taking ugly and damaged and broken and remaking into beauty, well, now all kinds of possibilities open up in front of you. Not just about how God can repair someone broken near you, but how God can really repair you and make you into someone that you're craving to be. A life giver. You know, I read a portion of Psalm 27, and again, I just strongly encourage you. I've spent so much time in my life journaling in Psalm 27, just hearing God's words. David faced so much threat from a literal enemy that could wipe him out. And he's directing his waiting and his trust on God, and God is going to be there. I'm going to be the stronghold of your life. I'm going to guide your paths, David. And it just takes a psalm. It just takes a psalm, sometimes just 45 seconds or a minute to read. Oh, wait, there's another narrative. Wait, God is actually working. God does have a plan. Even though this is broken and gross and ugly, he has a plan. He steps into the mess. That's right. Jesus actually came into brokenness. He came into the ugly to start turning humanity back into beautiful. Here's another example, Romans chapter 8. So now there is no condemnation for those who belong to Christ Jesus. Man, there may be someone listening to this message, or you're here today, and more than anything I would say at all, this is the resounding, confronting truth to your story, the story you're telling yourself. Now, because of allowing Jesus to be Lord, leader of my life, there's no condemnation. There's no condemning of me. Nothing from my past, nothing I've said, nothing I've chosen, not the way I've been raised. Nothing can condemn me because I belong to him. The remaker, the reshaper, the true story shaper, the writer of the most beautiful stories. Gospel is that word. It's used so much in church and it's almost forgotten. Gospel means remarkable news. In the face of the mundane or broken or no hope, this remarkable news comes. It would be yelled from the mountaintops. In Isaiah, you could hear it in the distance. The messenger coming from the battlefield, good news, good news. And it gets louder and louder as the messenger runs to the city. Great news. That is the word gospel. I believe there's the gospel, the great remarkable news of Jesus, and what he wants to do is the center point of our story. He wants to become the character of our story, the main character. We have this other broken gospel, this anti-gospel, that is our inner critic. And it becomes this pervasive decider of how we live our lives, how we interact, how we build friendships, guarded, blaming. Paul goes on to say in Romans 8, there's no condemnation for those who belong to Jesus. And because you belong to him, the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power of sin, of brokenness, of selfishness that leads to death. The law of Moses was unable to save us because of the weakness of our sinful, selfish nature. So God did what the law could not do. He sent his own son in a body like the bodies we sinners have, and in that body, God declared an end to sin's control over us by giving us his son as a sacrifice for our sins. He became the ugly. He became the incomplete. He became the broken. And this is why his resurrection is so important. He not only took from us our brokenness, he now offers us life over the way you were treated, or the way you've always looked at the world, or maybe over that mistake that still haunts you. The movie Good Will Hunting, of course, won an Academy Award. Just powerful, powerful story. Will Hunting, played by Matt Damon, is this young janitor working in one of the world's most elite, prestigious schools, MIT. He's working as a janitor, and he, after hours, would see these complicated math problems on the board and would solve them, like overnight. And this professor, played by Robin Williams, discovers, wow, so much potential in this young janitor, and kind of takes him under his wing and begins to mentor him. And in this relationship, the professor discovers how horribly abused Will Hunting had been at the hands of his father. And we've cut out a lot of the ugly and some images and photos from the hospital and police reports to show this really powerful scene. Let's watch. This crazy, simple scene, so powerful because we realize Will Hunting has had a story that's just been playing over and over every day in his life. It's the story he's been telling himself. So now, there is no condemnation for those who belong to Jesus. Jesus took your brokenness. I know I'm standing here and I'm the pastor and we're almost done. We're at the end of time here this morning, and so it sounds like I'm at the end of this message, but just let these words, Jesus has taken your brokenness. He became your brokenness. Jesus has taken your regret. He became your regret. Jesus has taken any ugly. He's become your ugly. This is why the cross was so ugly. Give control of your life to him. Trust control of your life to him. Will you do this? We're not playing church. That's not our intent here. We're not just here to hear. We're not here to listen to just an encouraging message. We are here to actually change the trajectory of our lives. And we do that practically. We take that step by giving control of our lives, our decisions, our perspectives to Jesus. And as I close here in prayer, I'm just going to, it can just seem so simple. You're sitting in this seat where you are, and you say, okay, God, I'm going to try you in control of my life. This is the most profound moment of your life. Because you're allowing that soundtrack to change. Suddenly you have an altered soundtrack. There's this new narrative, this new voice, these new words begin filling your mind and your heart and dictating the future, your future, the direction of your life. Jesus, may we not call out to you just in emergencies when we need you to fix something in front of us. We make you Lord, leader of our lives, the whole life, my whole life. My narrative is exhausting. The narrative, the story we tell ourselves, leaves us lonely. It leaves us paranoid. Something great happens and we begin worrying about the next awful possibility. Jesus, we want your words, your view, your power, your perspective to replace the story we tell ourselves. And so we give you permission. I give you permission. Just right now at your seat, just under your breath, let that be the cry of your heart. Jesus, I give you control of my story. I give you control of my life.